Hi everyone, I'm Mary from Joyful and Mary Quilting, and today I am sharing one of my favorite tools for pressing yardage, quilt tops, backing fabric, large blocks, and long strips and seams, a wool pressing mat. But this is not just any pressing mat. First of all, it's merino wool, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. And this mat is huge. It's 20 inches by 60 inches, and it gives me so many more pressing options that I just can't get using a smaller pressing mat or even a traditional ironing board. Now I want to tell you that I did a lot of reading about wool and wool pressing mats, and there's some great information here and many various opinions about these mats. I think I really read them all. So this is a little long, but there's a lot of valuable information here. Let's take a look at my experience and what this mat has to offer to quilters and to sewists. Now, the Novodon company invited me to try out their merino wool mat. I have always wanted a large mat, a 20 by 60, which covers my whole big board ironing board, but I hadn't made the commitment. So I was really excited to give it a try. Now, the Novodon company has an interesting philosophy when it comes to their product, and it's written on the outside of the box. It's a really cute box. It says, "Do I really need merino wool instead of New Zealand wool?" And the answer is, well, think of it like ice cream versus gelato. Both are great, but sometimes you deserve that extra fancy scoop. It's not just wool, it's a spa day for your quilts. Who says your fabric can't have a little pampering too? Intriguing, right? So I did some checking and I found out that not all wool mats are created equally. I came across two common issues, you've probably heard of these, that some, not all, wool mat owners have experienced. The first one is, my mat leaks moisture under the mat and onto my table when I'm pressing. Not just a little dampness, but lots of moisture. To the point that, really for some, the table underneath their mat, as well as the mat itself, got really wet after a pressing session. And the second issue that people have said is, my mat smells terrible when I'm pressing. And it does, it has that barnyard smell to it. So how do we spot a high quality mat that doesn't have those issues? And then how do we protect our mat and keep it clean for a long lasting use? First of all, before I get into the benefits of a wool pressing mat, let's talk about the differences between merino wool and New Zealand wool. I did some research, and New Zealand is home to 35 million sheep, but only 3 million of those are merino sheep. Merino wool is a special type of wool that's known to be incredibly soft, durable, and it's really naturally breathable. It's known for its ability to keep heat in when it's cold and to cool you down when it's warm, which is exactly why it makes such a fantastic pressing surface. So here's the takeaway. All merino wool is a natural fiber wool that comes from sheep, but not all New Zealand wool is called merino wool. While New Zealand wool is still great quality, merino wool is a step above when it comes to softness, density, and effectiveness as a pressing mat. So that's why you'll often see it marketed as the luxury wool option. So let's take a look at my merino wool mat by Novodon. What makes a wool pressing mat in general so special? Wool pressing mats are a game changer, but here's something a lot of people don't realize, and this is really important. Not all mats are made from 100% wool, and that's where the issues are. Some, especially those processed in other countries, are blended with synthetic fibers. That might not seem like a big deal at first, but those lower quality mats have some distinct issues that I read about in the product reviews. The lower quality mats that are not 100% wool can collect moisture underneath and even develop an odor when you're using steam. Definitely not something that you want in your quilting space. So it's really important that when buying a wool pressing mat, always check to make sure that it's 100% wool without those synthetic fibers that might not react well to steam. Now, there are pros and cons when it comes to using a wool pressing mat. So let's break down those pros and cons so that you can decide if this is the right tool for you. So let's talk about the pros of a wool pressing mat. First of all, it retains heat for faster pressing. So wool pressing mats hold onto the heat, which means when you press your fabric, you're actually pressing from both sides at once. Less time ironing. The mat absorbs the heat and pushes it back up into the fabric, and then your iron is pushing it down. So you don't have to turn your piece over, whether it's your fabric or your block, and press the opposite side. It's already done for you. The next thing that the wool pressing mat does is it keeps fabric from stretching when you are pressing it. The natural texture of wool grips the fabric in place, so there's no slide at all. It doesn't shift and it doesn't distort while it's pressing. It just keeps it where it is. There's no chance of you taking your iron and pushing the fabric out of place. The wool keeps it right where you placed it. This is a block that I created. It was not foundation pieced, it was just pieced with pieces. And when you press it using the mat, you can see this block does not slide anywhere. It stays right where I want it to be. And as I'm picking up and pressing it, or even if I move my iron a little bit, I don't have the distortion or the stretching that you get when you are pressing it on a regular pressing surface. You can see it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't move. I did not use any pressing solution on this. I did not use any steam. I didn't use any water. I am only using the heat from the mat. It's pressing not only the top from my iron, but it's pressing the bottom from the wool mat. And I think that is a great feature. You can see the opposite side is nice and flat, and I'm just really happy with the result. The next thing that a wool pressing mat does is it prevents fabric from stretching. You can lay your piece of fabric on your wool mat and it's not going to go anywhere when you're actually folding it and pressing it. The natural texture of the wool grips the fabric in place so it doesn't shift or distort while you're pressing. If I fold my fabric in half, or if I'm pressing my seams, I can actually count on the fact that that bottom piece isn't going anywhere and just focus on the top piece, the top half. As you can see, this stays in place nicely. It does not move, and I am able to just run my iron along the strip knowing that I have everything lined up properly. There's no stretching when I'm doing my pressing, and I love that feature. The next thing is the wool pressing mat absorbs moisture for a dry press. This is really interesting because you actually can skip steam or spraying with water altogether. When the wool pressing mat is heated, it naturally absorbs moisture from the air, and that also helps set seams without any extra water or steam. The wool pressing mat is actually very portable and it's super easy to store. A wool pressing mat can be used on any dedicated pressing surface, and larger mats like this one can cover more space, making it ideal for pressing multiple blocks or long sashing strips like I showed you. But remember, never place your wool pressing mat on your cutting mat. It cannot be directly on any surface that could be damaged because there is a lot of heat there and does go through. You can put it on several different things that we'll talk about in a minute, but not directly on a table or a pressing mat where you could have an issue with the heat. A wool pressing mat is portable and it's easy to store. It can be used on any dedicated pressing surface, and larger mats like this one cover more space, making it ideal for pressing multiple blocks or these long sashing strips or even yardage. There are some cons when it comes to a wool pressing mat. First of all, it can trap odors if it's not pure wool. Lower quality mats mixed with synthetic fibers can trap moisture underneath, and that can cause odors and even mildew, so you want to be really careful with that. You also need protection on your wool pressing mat from starch or excess moisture. Some pressing solutions can build up on the wool and on the fibers, and it can damage the mat over time. And we'll talk about how to avoid that in just a moment. But you want to make sure that you don't use a pressing solution or a starch directly on the wool fibers. Now, you can also damage surfaces if the pressing mat is not properly placed. That's why I said dedicated pressing surface. The heat that the wool mats absorb can transfer down to the surface below. You need to place something underneath it to protect your work area. So, what should I put under my wool pressing mat? If you're placing your wool mat on a table, on a cutting mat, or on a wooden surface, you'll want to protect that surface from heat and from moisture. So here are the best options to put under your mat. You can use a heat-resistant silicone or pressing pad. That works really well, and that's what I have. You can use a layer of cork, or you can even put a thick cotton towel underneath it. So you just want to avoid placing your wool mat directly on your cutting mat or on your table. The heat can warp and or damage it permanently. So, how do we protect and maintain our wool pressing mats? Avoid direct starch application. Now, spraying starch directly on the wool mat can cause buildup and potentially damage the wool over time. Instead, spray your fabric away from the mat, let it settle, and then bring it to the mat and press if you need to use that. Now, Mary Ellen's Best Press, Flatter, they are not considered starch. They are actually a pressing solution, but you still need to be careful. So I do not spray anything directly on my mat. I do have a cover, maybe a piece of flannel, a pillowcase, something like that, that you can put over your mat, and that will protect it. Then you can spray as needed using your Mary Ellen's, your Terreal Magic, or similar, even your spray starch. You want to use minimal moisture. That's so important. The mat does the work for you. So if you do need the extra moisture, use a very light mist of either water or a diluted pressing solution that's meant for wool. And again, Mary Ellen's has the go-ahead for that. Always use your pressing solution sparingly. Now let's talk about how to keep your wool pressing mat in great shape so that it lasts for years. Over time, lint and threads will collect on the surface. They just do, not even over time. After one pressing, you can find you've got threads all over the place. So what do I do to clean it? You can use a lint roller, you can use a vacuum with a soft brush attachment, you can even just use some tape to try and get it off if you spot check it. If needed, you can spot clean with a mild wool-safe detergent and let it air dry completely. Totally up to you. Now, if you need to store your mat, if you don't keep it out all the time, you don't want to fold it. Basically, you're just going to gently and loosely roll it up. You can tie it with a piece of string, or you can put it back in the box that it came in and then bring it out as needed. Folding it can create creases, and that can affect your pressing results, so you don't want to crease in the mat. I have mine on top of my ironing board all the time, so I don't have to put it away. But if you do fold it and crease it, that can give you issues when it comes to pressing. You've paid good money for this. You don't want to ruin it by folding it. Now, final thoughts. Is it worth the price? I'll be honest, Merino wool pressing mats are an investment, but I believe they are 100% worth it. The price was one of the issues I had with buying a wool pressing mat. That's why I didn't get one earlier. But now that I have tried this one, that's why I'm recommending it to you. I've tried it and I love it. I found that this Novodon pressing mat, the Merino wool, is really comparable in price to other pressing mats and other brands that are out there. If you want a crisp, professional looking seam, a wool mat will save you time, effort, and frustration. And if you've used a wool pressing mat before, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If this video helped, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your quilting friends. I love my wool pressing mat. I highly recommend it. There is a link to purchase it in the description if you're interested. I think it's very reasonably priced, and I think it's a great product. So my thanks to the Novodon company for introducing the Merino wool mat to me. I will definitely have this as one of my favorite tools when it comes to my quilt making and my pressing. Until next time, I'm always trying to be joyful, but I will always be merry. Thanks so much for watching.